This is an exclusive presentation of the Foreign Press Association.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm Ian Williams, President currently of the Foreign Press Association, and joining us today, I would say it gives me great pleasure, but it's the wrong phrase to use. Martin Lee, a veteran democracy campaigner in Hong Kong, was arrested last week and faces trial in a month's time, and almost certain imprisonment, since I don't think many people have illusions about the transparency of Hong Kong justice under Beijing's suzerainty. And we also have Bill Holstein, a veteran China correspondent. And just on a personal note, I should say that Bill and I were on an overseas press club trip to Hong Kong when we first met Martin.
1995, I believe.
Yes, a long time ago, more than I care to remember. And that was when the British were still in control officially, nominally. I believe on that occasion, we also met Fatty Pang, Governor Patton,
yes,
who was showing genuine concern for democracy and fought a rearguard action. I don't know what more he could have done, but he was under no doubts about the need to hold the Chinese as far as possible, but obviously didn't have that much support from the British government in terms of the handover, since they just wanted to wash their hands of it. Martin at the time was prescient about the difficulties that would be faced by the people of Hong Kong in the face of the alleged one country, two systems, and we're seeing increasingly the two systems are shrinking to the one system. So Martin, you were arrested, and the world has not discovered about this. I'm amazed at how many people don't know that you were arrested, because a year ago it would have been big news with you and your colleagues, but now with undercover virus, the PRC has been quite sneakily effective in its PR terms of doing this undercover of the virus.
Well, let me correct one thing, I'm sorry. Trials in Hong Kong are still very transparent, but the judges are under a lot of pressure from Beijing, there's no doubt about that. And so we are worried that in the very near future, things may change drastically. Now, they arrested me, but trust me, it is a very good thing for Hong Kong that they have arrested me. Because for a long time, I was hoping to have a chance to address you guys, to be in contact with you, to tell you what's happening in Hong Kong, what's wrong with the central government in Beijing, and the tactics in Hong Kong, and so on and so on. But I had no opportunity until 7 policemen came into my flat this last Saturday morning, arrested me, and here I am addressing you. So,
Martin, under what authority did they arrest you? Was Carrie Lam's administration directly involved in arresting you, or did the PRC make an end run around her government and get this organized independently?
well, on the face of it, of course, everything they did was on behalf of the Hong Kong government, or rather done by the Hong Kong government through the police force. But everybody in Hong Kong knows that our government, all these civil servants, are puppets of Beijing. They just listen to Beijing. That's the unfortunate thing about it. So I was arrested. I would be given a fair trial, I assure you, although the law was very draconian, it's not fair, right? But that's a different matter. The courts will give me a fair trial, no doubt about that. But we'll see. And
the question is, if the Hong Kong government was outmaneuvered and Beijing intervened directly to arrest you, then it seems to me that they have some egg on their face, and that do you think that the government should resign over this? I mean, have they been revealed to be just sheer puppets?
yeah, they are puppets. In the eyes of the Hong Kong public, we don't trust the Hong Kong government. That's why we are dealing with this coronavirus so well. It's not because of Carrie Lam. It's in spite of Carrie Lam. The Hong Kong people don't trust the government. So when Carrie Lam told everybody not to wear a mask, we all wear masks, right? So that is why so far in Hong Kong, only 4 persons died of the coronavirus. Isn't it fantastic? But that's not her achievement. It's the achievement of Hong Kong people. We all wear masks, we're all careful. We listen to our doctors, not government doctors, because they're under the influence of Beijing. And so we're doing well, in spite of the government. So Hong Kong must be kept as we were under British rule. And we were promised by Deng Xiaoping that things will not change. Our way of life will not change for 50 years. Under this principle of one country, two systems, Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong not Beijing, and with a high degree of autonomy. But unfortunately, 6 years ago, in June 2014 to be precise, the Chinese government published a white paper in 7 different languages claiming that the central government has comprehensive jurisdiction over Hong Kong. So instead of Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong, it's Beijing, the central government ruling Hong Kong with comprehensive jurisdiction. Now, that is 180 degrees contrary to what that should be promised Margaret Thatcher in the Joint Declaration. The whole world seems to be not concerned with that. That's 6 years ago. The British government did nothing all these years. And I've been trying to tell people, but nobody seems to be interested until my friends and I got arrested. So it is a blessing to Hong Kong that we got ourselves arrested.
Well, I'm glad you could look at it with such equanimity, Martin, because no, it's on the other hand, it's catastrophic that they've managed to get away with it without popular protest, and the people, the world community, as in so often with Beijing, seems to be nodding in acquiescence and letting this pass. What could we all do to alert attention to? Is there any measurable, sensible way that Beijing could be pressured to honor its promises under Deng Xiaoping?
Well, that was an international agreement registered with the United Nations. We were reminded by the Chinese leaders at that time, again and again, don't worry. See, they were worried that Hong Kong people, a lot of Hong Kong people, the good people, the able people, the rich people, will all leave Hong Kong together with overseas investors. And that is why when the Joint Declaration was first announced on the 26th of September, 1984, a long time ago, a lot of governments came out to applaud it, including the US government, Canadian government, many European governments, and so on. Why? Although this agreement was only between the British government and the Chinese government, because both governments lobbied very hard behind the scenes for international support, so the Hong Kong people would have confidence in the future, and so that the immigration tide from Hong Kong would stop. And with the international support, huge international support on the same day that was announced, the immigration tide actually subsided right away because we had confidence in the future. But it can only work if Beijing wants it to work. Now, at the time, I gave the example of a seesaw game that we all played when we were kids. Here's a seesaw game. If the father sits on this side and the little one sits on this side, it goes like this. There's no game. And the only game possible is for the big guy to move towards the center of the plank until an equilibrium is struck, then you've got a game. Now, how can that equilibrium be maintained? I gave 2 conditions. One is democracy, so that those ruling Hong Kong, say the chief executive, and all members of the legislature would find it necessary to always stand on our side, always defend our little system. And if they are perceived not to be doing that, they won't win the next election. So we need a system, a democratic system of government to help the little boy to stay at this side of the plank, all right, and not move forward. The other thing is no interference from the central government. Otherwise, it goes again like that, okay? So the little one has to maintain his position. The big guy has to move forward and maintain that for every day of the 50 years. But now, democracy is nowhere in sight. They don't even talk about it anymore. And China is now interfering through its office called the Central Government Liaison Office. So it goes like this now. And our chief executive and all the government members, they're entirely on China's side. So that they should be on this side, they're not on this side.
Could you explain for people the transition to democracy? The British, to their shame, allowed very limited democracy in Hong Kong in their own right. So they weren't really in a position to shout too much when the Chinese, when the PRC imposed its own version of guided democracy and voting blocks. But as part of the agreement, as I remember, it was a transition to democracy was promised. In what way has that failed and has it been diluted, and what stages?
Now, the Joint Declaration only says that the chief executive shall be appointed by Beijing after election or consultation in Hong Kong. So it's either. But all members of the legislature must be elected. But the basic law, which is our constitution, drafted by China with some input from Hong Kong, and I was one of the drafters, the basic law laid out the timetable for change. And it says the ultimate goal is to have the chief executive and all members of the legislature to be elected by universal suffrage. But Beijing said 10 years for the development of democracy. So from the 1st of July 1997, we don't have it. But 10 years down the road, 2007, we could have it. But this is the 23rd year now. And it developed somewhat, and then it stopped because Beijing doesn't want it. And that is a problem. They are now breaking their promises, but not only on democracy, not only on non-intervention, but they actually say, look, instead of Hong Kong, people ruling Hong Kong, we will rule Hong Kong. And instead of you guys having a high degree of autonomy, we will have complete jurisdiction.
Martin, I regard you as the canary in the coal mine, that if the canary gets sick from the methane gas, then everybody's in trouble. What do you think they're thinking in Beijing at this moment? Are they, and is your arrest, do you think, part of a broader hardening of the strategy coming out of Beijing? I see there's more maneuvering in the South China Sea. I see signs of putting pressure on Germany. Do you think that there's a hardline element that's prevailing in these different areas of the world, and that's connected to your situation?
I think Beijing is getting very impatient. They don't want any trouble from Hong Kong, from our young people who want democracy, like me. But of course, they use different means. They use some force and some degree of violence, which I do not subscribe to. But then, how can I condemn young people? I mean, they have been looking at me, at us, fighting for democracy in a peaceful way and not getting anywhere. So I don't agree with the violence. But how can I condemn them when the government allowed the police to attack them after arresting them unnecessarily, so thereby committing criminal offenses in the execution of their duties, and not a single policeman was arrested, certainly not prosecuted. On this side, 8,000, almost 8,000 people have been arrested, and over 1,200 of us have now been prosecuted. On the other side, the police side, not a single one. Now that, to me, is a complete breach of the rule of law, because not everyone is equal before the eyes of the law.
Martin, I was asking you to speculate a little bit about the motivations. We see the Chinese hardening their positions on a variety of issues. They're expelling American journalists. Your arrest certainly is a major signal. Do you think that you say they're impatient? Do you think that they're trying to accelerate the China, creating a global world order that's Sino-centric? Do you think that they're taking advantage of the pandemic, in other words, to assert their interests in the world?
I think they simply want to implement a new policy to exert their power over Hong Kong, and they don't care if any government were to raise any matter with them. They say, none of your business. That's what they say, none of your business, mind your own business, all right? Hong Kong is internal affair. But Hong Kong is not an internal affair. Hong Kong now belongs to China as a result of this treaty with the British government. Otherwise, Hong Kong and Kowloon would remain ceded to Britain, all right? Only the new territories had to revert back because it's under a 99-year lease. So now they want to implement that new policy, all right? They want to be masters over Hong Kong, to suppress any dissent in Hong Kong. No freedom of the press, no freedom of protest, whatever. Everybody must obey orders from Beijing. Now, of course, at the same time, our election of the Legislative Council is coming up. That will take place in September. And this particular session of the Legislative Council will come to an end in July this year. So they don't have that much time. And they don't want to see the Democrats to get the majority in the Legislative Council. It will be almost impossible for us to get the majority because the electoral laws are so very much tilted against us, all right? And, but even then, they fear that we would get the majority. And hence they will stop at nothing to stop that from happening. And even if we win, I think they are going to disqualify the winners. They don't care. I don't think they worry about international intervention because they have seen nothing so far. 6 years, nothing was done, even though they told everybody in 7 languages that this is their new policy.
With the elections you mentioned, is there any serious chance that of a transfer of power, of legitimacy, given the constraints of the electoral system, the electoral colleges? Can the people of Hong Kong put pressure on the members of those electoral colleges in a way that would, let's say, persuade them it's in their best interest to go along with the popular will?
There is some chance, not much, because it's very difficult to persuade companies to cast votes in support of our candidates. A lot of these constituencies are elected by companies. So one company, one vote. So instead of one person, one vote. All right, so it's very difficult, but they are afraid that they may lose quite a few of these functional constituencies because of the way this government has been performing, always under the pressure of Beijing, always kowtowing to Beijing. It's just stooges of Beijing. So they are worried about that, right? But even if we win the majority, I think they would do their best to stop us from gaining the majority. Actually, they would disqualify legislators left, right, and center, which they have been doing already.
Martin, what specific law were you arrested for violating? What specific Hong Kong law? What are the charges against you, and how will you respond to them in court?
2 charges. One is organizing an unauthorized assembly. The other one is participating in the same assembly. Now, what happened was on the 18th of August last year, 1.7 million people went to Victoria Park, and then this is where the procession started. But the police did not give consent to that. All right. So they said, now this is unauthorized assembly. You guys shouldn't have done it. Now I can't give you more details because I'm being charged for these offenses. It's up to the court to decide what happened. All right. So I can't go into the details anymore. But these are what I gave you was the background of the 2 charges.
Mm.
It'd be interesting to see if your opponents are as punctilious about the sub judice rules as you are, Martin.
Certainly not, because so far they're very unhappy with some legislators, the pro-democracy legislators. They are accusing them of filibustering, all right? But then they are doing things according to their own rules of procedure of the Legislative Council. Certainly, it's none of the business of Beijing how legislators conduct their meetings, but they are interfering. They are now saying all sorts of things that this chairman who is conducting these meetings, that he is guilty of this offense or that offense. Now, officially saying that. Now, you can see the pressure brought upon our Secretary for Justice, who is supposed to decide whether to prosecute or not. And if she decides to prosecute them for whatever offense, there's already huge pressure on the courts, because Beijing already said that these guys are guilty.
On Saturday, after your arrest, the Hong Kong government put out a variety of different statements, 3 different conflicting statements. That suggests to me that they were caught off balance by this and didn't see it coming or didn't anticipate it or weren't ready for it. What is your interpretation of why they issued 3 different statements?
The three statements concern Article 22 of the Basic Law, is it? That, you see, under the Basic Law, which is our Constitution, no department of the central government should interfere or shall interfere with the internal affairs of Hong Kong. But this liaison office of Beijing says that they are not covered by it. Right? The law, in fact, governs it, among other people, but they themselves said the law.
Sorry, for me, the video is frozen.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
So I
So
can see you, Ian, but I can't hear you, Ian.
Yeah, I can hear you now. I think.
We're good.
So this body, this liaison office that Beijing set up in Hong Kong, claims that the law doesn't govern them, that they are some of the law.
Wow.
And the government concedes, not only concedes, but at the 3rd statement, which you mentioned, the 3rd one, they completely capitulated and apologized for not understanding that particular provision well enough. When for 22 years now, that body, the liaison office, actually abided by Article 22. And they even got exemption from stamp duties when they bought many properties in Hong Kong, so that they were spared of something like 200 million Hong Kong dollars of stamp duty, because it claimed that it is within Article 22.
Let me get this straight. The Hong Kong government apologized to the PRC for not understanding that the liaison office was not included in and not covered by basic law.
Yeah, even though for 22 years, everybody agreed that it was subject to Article 22.
That's staggering.
Yes.
My internet connection is unstable, it says. Another casualty of the coronavirus as everybody watches their morning shows.
If I have Ian Williams where we want him, we can not let him into the conversation.
Silenced. But I'm interested in the implications for China, for Hong Kong here. Are there any signs of, so it's obviously a popular mass movement, are there any signs of an organized consumer boycott on the various business constituencies to persuade them to recognize the validity of democracy and the people's will in Hong Kong?
Well, there's been some attempts. For example, the pro-democracy people would boycott certain restaurants which they know to belong to the pro-Beijing people, and they would frequent only those restaurants which they considered to be sympathetic to them. All right? But because of the virus, our laws are changed, and in every restaurant, there is certain distance that you must obey between tables, between the customers, and the police would only visit these particular restaurants which favor the protesters, all right, and give them all sorts of trouble. They inspect the identity card of every customer. They inspect the liquor license, whatever license of the restaurants, and they do it again and again. But the other, this is what.
But can consumers return that and say that if we are watching and anyone who votes for the pro-Beijing candidate will be boycotted in perpetuity by everybody? We will picket their restaurants and their factories and their stores.
Now, I actually do not agree with this sort of tactic, because if you operate a restaurant and some of your clients love democracy, some of your clients don't, but you want them all to come to your restaurant. Now, if you only do business, if only half of them come to your restaurant and they're not the other half, you already suffer loss. But they are forced into this sort of thing. Not that I advise you, not that I agree with it, but then they chose to do it this way. So those restaurants that pro-democrats people favor would have business, but then the police would try to interrupt their business. And with the virus, of course, no restaurant can make money now. No restaurant can.
Martin, who are your allies in the U.S. government? What arms or bodies within the U.S. government do you feel are concerned about what's happening to you, and what might they do credibly to help you? Obviously, we don't want to go so far as to outright create an international confrontation any more than we already have with China. But who realistically is fighting for you in the American government? What can they do?
Actually, Hong Kong has always been bipartisan as far as the US Congress is concerned, has always been and still is. And I want it to remain that way. And during my last recent visits, I could see members of the Congress enjoying the fact that you could work together on Hong Kong. Same with the Senate. And I really wish them to remain that way, and I think they will. So both parties support us, and even Secretary Pompeo, for instance, issued statements in support of us, the Vice President too. So we have support, but it's not good enough from only one government. Now, I want to make plain that I'm not asking you to start a war with China. No way. I just want China to honor her agreement with the people of Hong Kong and with the British government and with the blessing of the international community at the time, which China was very keen to obtain and did obtain. So all we want in Hong Kong is adhere to your promises. We haven't asked for anything more, but we insist on nothing less. That's all we're asking.
From an outside point of view, it looked like the Chinese were prepared to honor their promises about Hong Kong as long as it was in their sort of geopolitical and geocommercial interests. As long as Hong Kong was the predominant finance sector, the manufacturing and trading sector. But that these actions were uncannily aligned with the growth of Shenzhen and Shanghai and rival commercial centers. It seemed to those of us outside that the promises became less compelling for Beijing when they had more sort of economic wherewithal to do it. So in under those circumstances, the Chinese, the PRC was not listening to reason and justice when it agreed to this. It had strict commercial interests. So are there commercial interests that can be brought to play to persuade it that it's in its own interests to obey to follow the agreements it made all those years ago?
Certainly, yes. And I think Beijing knows that because the hardware is good, but the software is not good enough compared to Hong Kong, and they know it. But it seems to me that they don't care anymore, or at least they appear not to care anymore about this. And the important thing is to suppress Hong Kong.
But it's not just because a sense of completeness that we must have one China under one emperor. It's also, there must be some reciprocal feeling about the possibility of what happens in Hong Kong being a catalyst in China. And many of us were fairly surprised that the Beijing government did not suffer a bigger backlash for its inefficacy in dealing with the coronavirus epidemic and its obvious missteps in Wuhan. Are they still worried about a backlash from the Chinese people being inspired from Hong Kong, or are they getting complacent and that's why they're prepared to batter Hong Kong now?
I can't tell you. I don't know. But what I can tell you is that the Hong Kong government has not been handling this pandemic very well at all, because Beijing actually directs our chief executive what to do. For example, she was directed not to close our borders, even after Wuhan itself locked the city up and prevent people from leaving. We still allowed them to come into Hong Kong for a few more days. And so some doctors and nurses stood up and asked the government, stop there, close the borders, close the borders. Government would not listen. So they had to hold a strike for a few days. And they only succeeded in pressuring the government to close some of our points of entry, some. But they still allowed Chinese people coming in who might well be infected. Now it's okay. Finally, everybody coming to Hong Kong must be subject to 14 days quarantine, whether you're from China or from USA or anywhere. That's fine. Right? But these doctors and nurses who are quite prepared to give up their lives to save people by forcing the government to do the right thing are now being subject to discipline. Can you believe that?
From the Hong Kong government?
Yes, from the Hong Kong government.
Why are they being disciplined? What did they do wrong?
For holding a strike.
Huh.
Holding a strike to get the government to do the right thing.
Hmm.
It does seem a general pattern that the epidemic across the world has been used as an excuse for repressive government activities and for politicians to cover their tracks in many ways, but not in most other countries yet to the extent of arresting opponents. That this is a whole new dimension, and you're greeting this with equanimity. And but you know, I don't want to remind you of it because I'm getting on myself a little bit as well, as is Bill. But you are 82. And going to prison at the age of 82 has a sort of a terminality about it, especially in the middle of a coronavirus. And Are the stakes really that high that you welcome this opportunity, as you said?
Correction, I'm only 81.
My apologies, Martin. You look even younger, of course, but still.
No, but the important thing to me is that all these years I'm fighting for democracy for Hong Kong as was promised. I entered into politics because I wanted to contribute towards the rule of law so that all our freedoms can be preserved under the basic law, which is the China drafted Constitution for Hong Kong, which I also helped. So I devoted all my life to that cause already, and I'm quite prepared to continue doing it. After all, there's not too many years left, all right, for me to continue my struggle. And that is why I take this well, because I'm at peace with what's happening. All right, they arrested me, they prosecute me, I may be convicted, I may even go to prison, but at least the world is watching. And I hope something good can come out of it. Not to punish China in any way, but simply to ask China to honor their promises and no more.
Martin, how do you put this in the context of the global battle over the narratives? I mean,
I'm afraid I've frozen again, so the rest of you.
Chinese authorities are trying to create the narrative that China is saving the world from this disease and that they're the heroes of the story, as opposed to the other prevailing view is that it came from Wuhan and they have some responsibilities to the world for what happened. So are they trying to divert attention from this larger argument by, it's called wag the dog in American movies, by creating another incident in Hong Kong that will divert attention from this broader struggle?
Well, I think the Hong Kong people, a lot of Hong Kong people know that the virus started, never mind how it started, but certainly started in Wuhan. And the Chinese government never disputed it in the beginning. You know, it's all on record, what they said. And so we know it came from Wuhan. We also know that for something like 12 days, they kept it as a secret, and the whistleblower was punished. I mean, all these are what generally people know and believe to be true. Until recently, they tried to change the narrative. So the Hong Kong people believe that certainly there was a lot of delay, 12 days of delay in telling us and telling the world what actually went wrong. And if those days, 12 days, had been saved and they did not hold things, kept things a secret, maybe it would be much better for us and for the rest of the world. But we are lucky in a way because the Hong Kong people took it upon themselves to defend ourselves. And we are doing so far very successfully. But I can only say so far, because who knows when the second wave, the third wave will hit us.
You're very, how to say, you've been measured in your statements, right. Incredibly measured in the fact that you've been arrested and you're greeting this as an opportunity as an object lesson for Hong Kong. But you have two audiences. You have Hong Kong, well, three. You have Hong Kong, you have Beijing, and you have the rest of the world. And one of the problems in the rest of the world, and I'm sure you're doing it, but perhaps you could explain your thoughts on it, is, of course, in the United States, we have we have an administration that seems to be able to drop all principles in return for a good trade deal. And on the other hand, we have rampant xenophobia and attacks on China in a way that, regardless of the politics, a smack of xenophobia and xenophobia. So how can you steer this to make sure that you're not lumped in as part of some big anti-China plot in the US? Because there is an anti-China plot in the US as well as the legitimate concerns.
Yes. And they always accuse me of being anti-China too in Hong Kong. They make that accusation all these years, right? But I'm not. I'm only defending Hong Kong as I should, because that's what the basic law says. The basic law only require all the government servants, senior ones, and the judges, and the legislators, and everybody to take an oath of upholding our basic law, not the Chinese constitution, and bearing allegiance to Hong Kong, not to China. So I'm loving my country by making sure that the Hong Kong system survives well for the entirety of the 50 years. That's the way I do. But as for politics in your country, remember, I want bipartisan support. So I will not go one side or the other.
Martin, in terms of the people in the streets, the pro-democracy protesters, have they been effectively neutered? Have they been rendered null and void by all the arrests, or is that still a potential development? Could there be people in the street protesting your arrest?
In fact, I don't want them to protest over my arrest. First of all, the law now, because of the pandemic, is that you cannot have more than 4 people together in a public place. So in other words, if a couple has 3 children, then they cannot all go to the restaurant together. Right? They maybe have to separate into 2 groups while they're on their way there. And again, when they sit down, they have to split up into 2 tables. All right? So it's very strict. And so you cannot have any procession, no matter how peaceful.
I just had a vision of Victoria Square filled with Hong Kongers all 6 feet apart. It would look very impressive. Have you considered this?
But maybe that's one reason why your timing of your arrest was what it was, because Beijing knows there can be no protests. There can be no.
Oh, yeah.
That very, very interesting timing.
Yeah. So I don't know whether they took advantage of it deliberately or I don't know. But the truth of the matter is Hong Kong people continue to want democracy because it was promised. Yeah.
Well, you're a barrister of long standing, and you know, it's part of your job would be to advise your clients about the possible outcome of a trial. What advice do you give yourself about the possible outcome here, the length of the sentence and the verdict and the rest of it? And you know, have you weighed up the odds? Are you going to strike a plea deal?
Well, if I were acting for somebody on these charges, I would have thought this was a pretty straightforward case. It's not murder, it's not rape, it's not commercial fraud. But when it is my case, I suppose I've got to think a little more carefully and make sure that I don't say the wrong things in court and so on. But yeah, I haven't decided whether to defend myself or to get a good team of lawyers to defend me. I've got plenty of time to think about that. But in the meantime, I hope the world's attention are kept in Hong Kong. I hope your members, foreign journalists, will continue to write about Hong Kong. It's important. It's very important because they can then make sure that Hong Kong does not disappear from your radar screen. And quite a few of them have been thrown out.
Are British lawyers and QC still allowed to appear in Hong Kong courts? Would it be to your advantage to have a prominent British lawyer, not because British lawyers are better, but because they're foreign for Hong Kong, to come and plead the case for you?
Oh yeah, they are still permitted to come on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, on the big cases, they still come.
So have you been exploring getting a celebrity lawyer come politician from Britain to come and participate in the case? On a PR point of view rather than a sort of legal expertise?
Well, I wouldn't do it on a PR's point of view because they are pretty expensive.
Oh, they might volunteer. Occasionally lawyers do pro bono work, I hear.
Hey, I may get some, yeah.
Ian, do you want to take any questions from the chat room, from the audience?
Well, there's several. I mean, there's a lot of it is we've covered to some extent. The US, at the moment, one of the questions here is on the is on China. Is China taking advantage of the vacuum left by the US? It's getting more and more assertive in the South China Sea, in Hong Kong. It's getting more aggressive vis-a-vis Taiwan and with other disputes with the Philippines, etc. And a lot of people look at the equation and they see the US stepping backwards because of its preoccupation with its own politics and the virus. And is this part of your geopolitical calculus on how it affects Hong Kong?
No, I focus on Hong Kong because it's easy for me to focus on Hong Kong because of the promises already made in the agreement and in the and the way they dealt with the international community on Hong Kong. And I believe that I am standing on so long as I keep the right issue and keep our moral high ground, then it is very difficult for the Chinese government to attack us. I mean, let them attack us. They've called me a traitor. But for what? For asking them to adhere to their own promises. Now, if I'm a traitor, then so be it. But I certainly will not kowtow to Beijing and not continue to help the Hong Kong people to get what they are entitled to. Now, but I don't want to wander away to other issues, because then people will then lose the focus on Hong Kong.
I know you want to focus on Hong Kong, obviously, but let's broaden it out slightly. Deng Xiaoping, when he accepted this agreement and negotiated this agreement, did so because he thought what was happening in Hong Kong in terms of democracy, rule of law, and economy would be beneficial to China as a whole. And as I mentioned earlier, the equation and your seesaw, let's say the big one, has moved further down the pencil on this. Is this still a factor? Can you, how much of a case can you make that what China is doing in Hong Kong is self-destructive for the greater good of China as a whole?
Well, I can see it this way. If China wants to expand her power and influence in the rest of the world, it can only be to China's advantage to be trusted. And so it is important that China should impress the world that China always honors promises made, always keep international agreements. Otherwise, if China wishes to expand her influence like this, and then break promises, even contained in an international agreement, people will say, how can we trust you? And the more power the Chinese government wishes to exert outside China, being the world's second largest economy, the result is people will get afraid of China, looking at the way they treat Hong Kong, and they are likely to gang up together against China. So it cannot be to China's interest not to honor promises. And that's why I say the key to China is Hong Kong.
Well, you remember at the time of Deng Xiaoping, he held this up as a future prospective model for Taiwan, as well as a one
Indeed.
nation, two systems. I don't think he's going to be able to sell that particular rubber check to the Taiwanese after the last 10 or 15 years, is he?
Well, clearly, the Taiwan people have always been looking at Hong Kong. And indeed, the Taiwan elections, the presidential election, very often depend on what China is doing to Hong Kong at that time. And so if China is very aggressive to Hong Kong, then the Kuomintang will lose. And the DPP would win. I mean, it happened again and again.
We have a question here about the Catholic Church has had a rapprochement with Beijing in recent years. Has this been at the cost of its ethical role in supporting democracy in Hong Kong? Has it spoken out at all?
No. I'm a Catholic. And well, the Vatican made an agreement with China over the appointment of bishops in China. The agreement is supposed to be for 2 years. It's almost up, but nobody knows the terms of the agreement. Nobody knows the terms of the agreement. And I don't think China has been treating the Catholics in China any better. They still destroy crosses at the top of our churches. They still stop young people from going into our churches. Anybody younger than 18 is not allowed in, and so on. So quite frankly, I don't understand why the Vatican would enter into this agreement. The underground church, as it were, in China has been extremely faithful to the Pope. They have been sent into prison again and again, including bishops, and they never abandoned the church. They never abandoned the Pope. And yet now they are told, well, why don't you come up and join the the official church. So they would say, for so many years, we have suffered and suffered in order to keep to our religion, and we owe and follow the Pope as a successor of Peter, the fisherman. And yet now you ask us to join the official church. Does it mean, therefore, we wasted all these years and all our suffering? And so I have to say I sympathize with it.
Martin, what's going to happen with the media in Hong Kong, both of the local media and the Western media? Jimmy Lai was arrested, of course, the creator of Apple, the news magazine and website. Do you predict that press freedom in Hong Kong will simply vanish for either Hong Kong-based media or the bureaus of international news organizations? What do you see happening there?
Well, I know as a fact that Jimmy Lai is struggling now. He's got a lot of readers, but very little advertisement. And advertisers are put under pressure. There is a former chief executive in Hong Kong who kept on, he would actually approach these advertisers of Jimmy Lai's Apple Daily and so on, and exerted influence on them not to give advertisements to Apple Daily and so on. So a lot of them will not dare to offend people of that kind. And so Jimmy Lai has been struggling very, very hard, but he will continue because he believes that Hong Kong people will depend on Apple Daily. It's really a free paper. It dares to criticize people, even the central government. And that's why it's very popular. But I know every paper he sells, he actually suffers a loss.
Would it be counterproductive if overseas companies were to step into the breach and to to stock the advertising revenue? Or would it, the cost effectiveness, because they'd immediately be open to charges of being agents of anti-China foreign powers, I presume?
Yeah, but so you have, in a way, it's very, very sad that even large international corporations would not dare to stand up, and they would just withdraw their advertisements.
Yes, international companies tend to be every bit as, how should we say, craven as domestic ones in these circumstances. But can we put pressure on here? Can we go to Apple and Amazon and say, hey, go and advertise in Jimmy's paper, or we'll boycott you here? You don't like boycotts, sorry, but some of us are more fond of them.
Do you think you will succeed?
They are very susceptible to public opinion at the moment. The revelations between reactions to the virus, not protecting workers, profiteering, taking money. I think many CEOs are looking over their shoulders at the popular reputation. That they can hear the sound of the tumbrils coming down the street unless they're very careful, I think, at the moment. So they are more sensitive to public opinion than has been their wont in the past.
Well, I hope you're right. But of course, freedom of the press and freedom of speech are guaranteed in the basic law. So
there was freedom from arbitrary arrest, Martin, and there you are.
I won't claim that the arrest was wrong. All right, they followed the procedure. They got a search warrant and so on, and they have the right to prosecute me. And whether they succeed or not depends on the court. Right?
Yeah, but they got the search warrant. Did they find that your back room was filled with Kalashnikovs and explosives, or test tubes of dangerous viruses?
But dangerous virus, I don't know. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Yes, we could all have.
And I have to say they were decent. I mean, they simply said, "All right, we want your shirt, all right, and we want your iPhone." And when they got them, they said, "Okay, we can leave." Yeah.
Oh, so it was the iPhone. Well, yeah. We can go and lobby Apple about this, perhaps. See what they can do. Well, I think we're coming towards the end now. Bill, do you have any questions to wind up?
Well, just a statement that I promised that we'll keep watching, Martin. The world will keep watching, and we'll stay engaged as best we can. And we will continue to express our views that democracy matters, and that to Hong Kong, and it matters therefore to the world, and that you matter very much to us. And so all we can do is wish you the very best of luck, and with our support, and we'll be watching.
Well, I'll follow that up and say that I cannot say it's been a pleasure, but it's certainly been an honor to give a platform to you, to the world. And since this was so obviously contrived to be done under cover of the virus, when they hoped people would be preoccupied elsewhere, but democracy is a cause that does not go to sleep, we hope, and we will persevere. Freedom of the press, democracy are things that we hold dear. And thank you very much for joining us.
Can I say the last thing? I thank you for organizing this, but it is important to keep Hong Kong as free as we still are, and hopefully we can in fact go back to Deng Xiaoping's blueprint for Hong Kong, so that Hong Kong can continue to supply the correct information to the outside world on the virus and on other things. Because correct information is very important to businesses too. And let Hong Kong continue our way as promised by Deng Xiaoping. Please do that.
We shall do. Well, thank you very much. This has been the Foreign Press Association of New York, and we've had the president of the Overseas Press Club, Bill Holstein, with us as well. And we've had Martin Lee, democracy campaigner, who octogenarian martyr. And I couldn't help saying, I don't want to be rude about it, but you mentioned St. Peter, and he was the first martyr. I hope that you don't join in the line of martyrs in this cause, Martin, and that you emerge triumphant from this, and that your trial proves, as you hope, a worthy beacon for the people in Hong Kong. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this broadcast. To learn more about our digital forums and programs, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. For membership information, please visit www.foreignpressassociation.org and on Twitter @FPA New York. This has been an exclusive presentation of the Foreign Press Association.